For this week's painting inspiration, I headed back to a nature reserve that I only visited last month, but the sun was out and the weather was a lot better than forecast, and I couldn't think of a better place to come on this lovely spring morning. I think one of the challenges of revisiting a similar spot is that I was automatically drawn to the things that I found most inspiring the last time I was here. Whenever I visit this reserve, there's a certain spot that is just my favorite out of the whole place, and it's this place here, and I just love the way that it's framed and how the calm water reflects the sky. I think it makes such a lovely painting, but I did this last month, and so I had to walk away from it and look for something else, and I think that was part of the difficulty, trying to find something that was different from this scene. I kept going back to places that kind of had a similar feel, and so I definitely struggled with picking out some painting inspiration this week. Another challenge in this week's video was the fact that I kept getting distracted by the wildlife. That's not a bad thing. It was lovely being surrounded by springtime wildlife, but it did mean that I wasn't completely focused on trying to choose something to paint. At this time of year, everything's pairing up and it's so noisy. There were black-headed gulls calling everywhere, and everything just seems a lot busier than it does in the wintertime, and it was just lovely. If you weren't listening to the noisy black-headed gulls, then you were surrounded by geese that were also being very noisy on this week's visit. There was definitely a lot of noise, a lot of calling from the gulls and the geese, but there were also some other bird calls that were really nice to hear as part of this week's visit. I heard my first chiff-chaff of the year, which was really exciting. They have just started migrating back for the springtime. Usually they spend the winter somewhere warmer. I only managed to record a really brief section before it stopped singing, but hopefully you can hear it in this next bit. There were great tits calling in the trees as I walked over the river, and there were also really loud wrens and other small songbirds that just kept popping up every now and then. It's always hard to record those because if you're not filming at the time they happen to sing, then you just end up missing everything. But in this next clip, you will hear a wren singing, and then there'll be a really loud burst of sound, and that's a Chetty's warbler. I have another sound that I want to share with you, and then, at some point in this video I will start talking about painting, but there was just so much wildlife I wanted to include. So another sound that was really great to hear as part of this trip was the bittern booming. Bitterns are like small brown herons, and usually you don't see them very often. You normally hear them rather than seeing them. Bitterns are a pretty rare bird. They almost went extinct in the UK, but their population is starting to increase again now. So it's always lovely to hear these. And they have a sound that is a bit like when you blow over the top of a glass bottle. As well as listening out to wildlife, there were also lots of things to see, and this next thing is one that would have made a really nice painting if the great crested grebes had decided to do this a little bit closer to the shoreline. I am aware that this is quite possibly the worst video in terms of quality that I am going to show you as part of this series, but I very rarely get to see this. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen great crested grebes do their whole courtship where they do this dance and they present weed to each other, and I thought it was just the loveliest thing and I was so excited. So I'm going to share it with you regardless of the fact that it's terrible quality and they just look like tiny blurry blobs in the distance. think great crested grebes are so dainty looking. I think they're amazing, and I've wanted to see them do this for such a long time. And so even though it was far away, I didn't mind. And I did get to see a slightly closer up version. They didn't do the full display, but they did part of it. So that was nice to see as well. As you can see, there was a lot of loveliness going on around this week's walk, and so you would think that maybe I would have painted a landscape or some of the wildlife, but the wildlife was a little bit too far away to see clearly for a painting, and some of the landscapes just looked very familiar to the ones that I've already painted, so I decided to focus a little bit closer up and look for some plants or some new springtime flowers that I could maybe paint as part of this video. This week was the first time I saw Blossom up close like this and was able to get some nice photos and video footage of it, so I decided that Blossom would be the subject of this week's painting. I definitely found this painting challenging, and I think maybe the change of subject was one of the reasons for that. Usually I do like to paint a variety, but for Artist Diaries I have been painting a lot of landscapes recently, and I think I started to develop a bit of a system for how I do that, and I'm not sure that translates very well into painting flowers. And the second reason I think this was a bit of a struggle this week is because I was tired. And paintings never seem to go very well when I'm tired because I don't concentrate properly. I struggle to give the painting the attention it deserves, and I think that was definitely a factor in why this one was a little bit more challenging than usual. I found myself struggling with this painting for most of the process, and there were definitely times where I just sat and stared at it and questioned whether it was a good decision to keep going with it or whether I should start again. In the end, I decided just to carry on, but it did make me think about how do we know when we're painting when it's a good time to keep persevering with it, and how do we know when to just throw in the towel and start again, and that will be the easiest option for us. And I think it's probably a difficult question to answer because it depends on so many factors. It might depend on how long you've actually been working on the painting. Have you been doing this for months? Because you're probably not going to want to give up on that, especially if you're close to the finish line. Or is it just something small and quick that you're working on and it might just be easier to start from the beginning rather than trying to muddle your way through? However, if I'm working on a painting that's mainly just for myself and I'm just doing it to practice something, then quite often it's worth persevering and just trying to overcome whatever obstacle I've reached within that painting. I think it's particularly helpful if you're trying to improve your skill as an artist, just trying to persevere through something and see if you can figure out how to fix the mistake or how to work through a particularly difficult area of the painting. Usually I find I learn a lot more through just trying to get it done rather than deciding I've had enough and I'm just not going to do it anymore, or I'm going to start from the beginning and hope to avoid the problem altogether. Another consideration when you're deciding whether or not to stick with a painting or scrap it and start again can also come down to your level of experience and whether you actually know what you need to do to fix the painting. Usually my strategy for this is to try and have a go and just see if I can figure out where the painting is going wrong and can I understand how to make it better. And I might work through that for a little while and see what I can do. But if I've been staring at the same painting for a really long time, I keep coming back to it and I have absolutely no idea how to fix it. Maybe I know that there's something wrong with it, but I really don't understand how to make it better, then there is limited use to me trying to see it through. My current approach is to do that, so I will attempt to try and fix the issues in the painting, or at least try to figure out where it's going wrong and what I might want to do differently next time. And then I try and work my way through it and see if I can fix it if possible, because I feel like I'll learn a lot more through doing that than through just giving up with the painting altogether. It might be that I reach a certain point where I figure out what's going wrong and I come up with a solution, but I'm unable to make it work on the painting itself because I might have gotten myself into such a muddy mess with the paint that I can't really undo it, and it would be easier to start again, in which case that might be what I do. Or if it's a small painting and it's just a practice piece, then I might carry on with it anyway and just chalk it down to experience and just make a note of what I would do differently if I were to paint something like this in the future. With my Artist Diaries paintings, I usually see them through to the end, even if I'm unhappy with them, just because they don't take a huge amount of time to do, and it's easier to do that than it is just starting from scratch. There's only one Artist Diaries painting from this year that I have restarted, and that's just because I thought it was pretty rubbish, and so I wanted to do it again, and that's what I did. But for the most part, I just try and see it through and finish them and see what I can learn along the way, and that tends to work out for this type of painting. With this painting, there were three main areas that I wasn't really that happy with. The first thing that went wrong was the blocking stage. Usually I use a very thin layer of paint just to block in the main colours, and then I use that as a guide for the rest of the painting. And I think that works particularly well with landscapes, but with this particular painting, it was a challenge, and I think that's just because of the smaller subjects. My initial block-in stage looked really messy, and I just found that I was kind of trying to fight with that the whole time, and it meant that the whole painting process was probably more challenging than it really needed to be. My second issue was the fact that the background and the foreground weren't as separate as I would have liked. There is a bit of a branch on the left-hand side that just stands out a bit too much. I think that should have either been removed or pushed further into the background so that the foreground flowers stood out a little more. Also, the colours on the petals of the foreground flowers kind of blend into the background sky colour, and it's hard to see where one thing ends and the other begins. That was a bit difficult to deal with once they were painted in, but it's something I would consider changing for next time. And the third issue was a problem with the painting I found of the second flower, which is kind of the main focal point of this painting. I decided to paint that with the shadow tones first and then put the highlights over the top. I don't usually do this anymore because it makes a mess, and I think down to tiredness or lack of concentration, I decided to do that this time, and it quite obviously didn't work out. It was really difficult to put the highlights over the top of the blue undertone, and they kind of just blended in with each other, so I ended up having to scrape back some of the painting and then redo it, but it still affected the final piece, and I think it probably would have been more sensible to redo that part completely, but we will learn for next time. In the end, I am glad I carried on with this painting. I don't think it would have gone very well if I'd have tried to do it again because I would have been a bit frustrated with having to do everything from scratch. So I think I learned as much as I could from this experience, and I will use it in my next Artist Diaries paintings to try and overcome some of the issues of this one. There's probably a lot more to say on this subject, but my time lapse was only 6 minutes long, so we're gonna end it there. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing the wildlife and watching the painting, and I will see you next time.